Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries.
This is the Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker, where we discuss everything from around the local professional sports scene in Colorado, such as the Denver Broncos.
Chris Harris comes out. I don't know if he was on the drive, but he said, I knew 15 seconds into that game that I should have been on T.Y. Hilton. If players are coming out and saying that, it falls again on the coaching staff.
Not to mention insiders from around your local sports scene. Ryan Spilborgs, former outfielder for your Colorado Rockies.
It's not going to be the 25 guys that leave spring training that are going to be the only guys the entire season. I mean, you need depth. You need guys that are going to be in your minor leagues that you may not expect.
Ryan Edwards.
You know, when you're talking about an offensive line, it's about the five best guys, right? And you're talking about the five best guys gelling. There hasn't been a lot of time for that.
It's showtime. Are you ready? Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is the November 30th edition of the Cameron Parker Show. We're doing a live broadcast instead of on a Friday, and that is because, well, with a prior work commitment, I decided to bump the Cameron Parker Show up a day, and therefore do it on a Thursday. The Cameron Parker Show is going up on a Thursday. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning into the Cameron Parker Show. If you would like to contribute to the Cameron Parker Show and be a regular contributor, please create a Spreaker account and therefore chime in on our chat line. We have a text line, if you will, as well, so to speak, and that text line is through Twitter, but the chat line, in essence, is the text line of the Cameron Parker Show. Please contribute. You can create an account. It's free, and because it's free, you guys can not only just create an account to contribute to this show, but if you guys feel like you want podcast audio experience, you guys can also create your own podcast. It's called the Spreaker Studio. It's exactly what I use at home. So feel free to chime in on the Cameron Parker Show. Follow the Twitter handle of the Cameron Parker Show at CP_show. And you can also follow my show handle at Cameron Parker PO. And a lot to get to, obviously, today. The Denver Broncos, we didn't touch a lot on it, obviously, on Tuesday, but we're going to talk a good deal about the Denver Broncos. The fact that this season has still been a frustrating one as far as the defensive side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball. But I want to talk necessarily about John Elway. You know, there's been much discussion as far as John Elway is concerned. What has been his draft analysis, the draft IQ of the man? You know, we're going to talk about necessarily where he stands, where he fits necessarily with potentially some of the makings of some potentially for him and what he's done so far with the organization. We're going to talk about that throughout the show. I'm going to try my hardest to see if I can get a friend of mine on the show. He's been the co-contributor, if you will. You know, I really with the guy that I could potentially have on, he legitimately was the sole creator of the name and creation of the Cameron Parker Show. And it's so funny because he and I were really just talking, you know, it was before a basketball game, or it was before a game that we were about to call. We were walking from our cars. We were actually walking from there to the Tivoli building, which is located down at the Metropolitan University of Denver, in downtown Denver, and we were just basically talking, and my friend literally just said, "How would you feel about owning doing your own show and just titling it the Cameron Parker Show?" He just threw it out there all willy-nilly, and sure enough, that was when the Cameron Parker Show was instituted, created, molded into what it is today. And so obviously the Cameron Parker Show started off at the Metropolitan State University of Denver, and broadcasting from the Tivoli and a bunch of others. So it took some time to brand the show, but I engaged and I had quite the following early on. I was one of the top 4 shows to listen to on campus in the mornings, and it was quite the time. It was quite an experience, and Anthony Rodriguez, who I will have the pleasure of maybe having on here during this broadcast, was the co-creator, or maybe the sole creator, should I say, of the Cameron Parker Show. We'll see if I can have him on this when we have during the show. He's a busy man, much like myself, so we're gonna try our best to get that man on. We're talking about the Denver Broncos right now. Obviously, the Denver Broncos, and it's been labeled time and time again on this podcast, on the social media sites, and on Twitter, and everywhere else, it's been labeled at the fact that the Denver Broncos have not had the season that they have. Well, it's the season that they all have regretted. Let's just put it that way. It's the season of regret for the Denver Broncos. And it's an amalgamation of a lot of different things. You know, you really started out incredibly well. The run defense was the best it's ever been, really. I mean, in the span of the team, in the 2015 team, people were throwing around arguments, myself included, that this run defense was the best it had ever been with the Denver Broncos, and people were going to the extreme and just saying that it was the best run defense, even better than 2015 year. And while it may have been correct at the time, a lot of things changed, and it's just started wearing on the team, and necessarily wearing on the defense as a whole. And I think the main focus really for this Denver Broncos defense is just there is just only so much amount of weight that this defense can carry. You know, you look at the way that they were playing throughout the year. They were looking at especially last year, the defense could only do so much. If the defense of this year was showing up this last year, you're looking at the exact same scenario for the Denver Broncos. Right now, they are on a horrendous losing streak. They are on a 7-game losing streak, a streak that really, it's unprecedented in the game of football. We're not talking the Cleveland Browns going on a 7-game losing streak because, well, that's what they do. They go on 7-game losing streaks. Well, heck, they go on 20-game losing streaks every now and then. But for the Denver Broncos to be on a 7-game losing streak, it means that, well, something's not right with this team, and that the fact is everything, it appears, is not right with this team. But really, when you look at the grand scope of this whole franchise, they still have a lot of pieces for it to make it work. The offensive line is potentially one of the biggest issues. Quarterback potentially the biggest. There's been no consistency in any of the play. Osweiler may have played the best potentially of all 3 quarterbacks. Paxton Lynch obviously came in against the Oakland Raiders and played okay, but really he ended up getting hurt. He had the high ankle sprain, basically shoving the evaluation process to another offseason, making it incredibly hard to evaluate the guy. And so I think that, you know, if you're the Denver Broncos fans, you really still have to hold judgment. Now, granted, holding judgment and putting it forth to get another quarterback, well, you still have to consider it because of the fact that, well, one, you have lost 7 straight, and so you have to consider all options and potentially what's out there. Well, the potential options that are going to be out there if you continue to lose, and if you're the Denver Broncos, you're going to have the options of potentially getting Alex Smith if he's potentially released. That doesn't appear to be the case because of the fact that Andy Reid really loves Alex Smith, and it does not appear that he will give the reins. Well, it does not appear that Alex Smith will be leaving anytime soon. However, it might potentially be trade bait. I mean, really, Travis Kelce was on Pro Football Talk Radio, and he was asked about Patrick Mahomes, and he was also asked about Alex Smith and how they've been blending together. And it's important for those type of players to understand their role as a quarterback and to groom the next generation. And for Alex Smith, and this is what Travis Kelce said, is that he has been the consummate pro. He's been basically with Patrick Mahomes necessarily from every step of the process when he was drafted, coaching him up, making sure that he is the best prospect and best quarterback potentially of this Kansas City Chiefs squad. And so ultimately, will Alex Smith be in the offseason as far as a quarterback necessarily for the Denver Broncos? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that Alex Smith could potentially be a target for the Denver Broncos. And really, the other quarterback that you want to go to is Drew Brees. And, well, now Drew Brees could potentially be a potential target for the Denver Broncos. But there's another option to consider with Drew Brees, and that is, well, he's 39 years old, if I'm not mistaken. He's with the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints are playing exceptionally well. We talked a little bit about it when Sayer Bettinger was on a couple weeks ago. But the fact of the matter is that he's 39 years old. And it's the situation of, because the team is playing so well, that he legitimately could not be an option for the 31 other teams in the National Football League because of the fact that the New Orleans Saints are, one, playing so well, and two, he's 39 years old, and so it's potentially the option that he could retire and hang his cleats up, potentially not wanting to play for another organization. Eli Manning is kind of the gray area. So Eli Manning is another guy, and obviously the whole situation with the New York Giants is a dumpster fire of how they've been handling that quarterback situation. You thought that the Vance Joseph and the media, as far as trying to hype up every single quarterback on our team, was bad. Obviously Vance Joseph saying that Brock Osweiler was tall, Paxton Lynch is tall. Basically not going through maybe a full evaluation process and just saying that the quarterback in the practices more importantly, have been good during the week. Well, we haven't seen it. That's a different story. You translate that to the New York Giants, and especially in the New York media, where everything is going to be heightened from the standpoint of, well, it could be heightened basically from the size of a peanut to the size of a watermelon as far as everything in the grand scope of things. And so for the New York Giants, and now potentially benching your franchise quarterback, it looks incredibly bad of an organization to hand the reins off to a guy that we know exactly who he is, and that is Geno Smith. Now, obviously the move itself is easy to get behind. I get it. The move is easy to get behind because of how bad they played. I get all that. But if you decide to potentially make the move and go to a different quarterback, why not give it to a guy like Davis Webb, who in the East-West Shrine, in the Senior Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, played pretty well. He at least earned a spot to potentially be drafted. He was potentially one of the best quarterbacks on the field during the Senior Bowl. So he clearly earned the respect of a lot of different coaches to be considered for an NFL roster. So you have to potentially see what you have in Davis Webb. And while Davis Webb could end up being started in a lot of games, why would you not want to just turn to him then? Obviously I heard that they potentially could want to see him for 3 to 4 games. Well, why don't you just want to give it to the guy right away? I mean, you obviously know what you have in Geno Smith. If you didn't do your homework, well, then I guess there's an understanding as far as why you want to go to Geno Smith. And that also goes to how horrible a preparation Ben McAdoo has been. If he does not know who Geno Smith is, and he's been living under a rock for the past 4 or 5 years, well, then that's clearly on Ben McAdoo. That's beside the point. The fact is about Eli Manning, and the fact is that he has spent a lifetime, a lot like Drew Brees, he spent a lifetime with that organization. So is it possible that Eli Manning could potentially retire as a New York Giant? Absolutely. There's always that opportunity. But there's also that opportunity that a lot like when the Indianapolis Colts, in a way, severed the relationship with with Peyton Manning, you could potentially see Eli Manning try to vie the services of another team. And this leads you to the point of, well, for Eli Manning's sake, of wanting to go to a different team. And does he want to go to a team that is capable of wanting to compete for a Super Bowl? That's really what Eli Manning should be looking at, and I think that this is why I think, as far as the top two destinations for quarterbacks and ones that are wanting to look for a quarterback, should be the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Denver Broncos. The Arizona Cardinals might potentially be a very interesting team to watch, necessarily because you look at the scenario, you look at the head coach that could potentially be there for you. The Arizona Cardinals are a very interesting team in all of this quarterback conundrum, quarterback free agency, and the NFL draft potentially. And you look at all of that scenario and the potential to work with, as I stated earlier, one of the best offensive quarterback minds, and that is Bruce Arians. So we will see potentially where the Arizona Cardinals go. But if you're Eli Manning, I think ideally you would prefer to choose either the Jacksonville Jaguars or the Denver Broncos. And it's going to tug the heartstrings necessarily of Eli Manning again. Because now do you want to consider the opportunity to play for your brother's team that he ended up playing the last few years of his playing career with? Or do you want to play with the head coach, who is now in the current front office of the Jacksonville Jaguars? Do you want to play with the head coach that you've known all your life? Do you want to play with a team that is young, one of the best young defenses in the entire National Football League, and is, for the matter, one player away from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender? It is definitely a conundrum, and I think that for the Broncos' sake, you do have to consider Eli Manning, because you have to consider all options. And I think that right now, after everything that has transpired with the New York Giants and everything on that East Coast, for Eli Manning, the best thing right now for Eli Manning is to right ship and be shipped off necessarily as a potential free agent. And you saw how emotional he was in the interview, and just everything that it was that you could just sense the feel of him, and you really did start to kind of feel pretty bad about the guy, understanding that that this is a guy that has been the franchise quarterback for 13, 14 years. And especially when you start getting other quarterbacks starting to ring in their opinions, and guys like Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers especially calling it pathetic, and Matt Ryan saying that he potentially feels for the guy. All those guys that have supported Eli Manning through all these years, and now starting to see potentially what has happened with Eli Manning. For one, it's a bad look on Ben McAdoo, but it's also a bad look on just the front office in general, and especially when you look at the opportunity. You even look at what John Mara, the general manager of the New York Giants, was talking about, saying that he was basically putting Ben McAdoo on the spot, saying that you have to evaluate the head coach, and you have to evaluate. John Mara was the owner, but yeah, the GM and the head coach. You have to evaluate everything as far as a franchise. if you're evaluating it now, this is my only one knock potentially on the New York Giants scenario. If you are evaluating it now, just fire the guy. He has been an absolute dumpster fire from the beginning. And, well, and for the record, as a Broncos coverage of a podcast and everything like that, there's nothing I can say because the Denver Broncos lost to the New York Giants, and in potentially a game, and that kind of takes us back into the Denver Broncos, it takes us back to a game that potentially broke, and I mean broke, the entire season of the Denver Broncos. Who would have thought that a coach that had been calling plays his entire season with the New York Giants gives the reins to Mike Sullivan, who does a different wrinkle, giving it giving more touches to Evan Ingram, and especially with the loss of Odell Beckham and Brandon Marshall and Sterling Shepard during that week, and potentially losing all those guys was a great scenario for the Denver Broncos, and they could not come away with a win. And not just that, they felt like they wanted to change the game plan necessarily and play to the point of they wanted to sling the ball around because they felt like that was the best matchup for their team, when all in all, the best matchup and the best game plan for the Denver Broncos was to run the rock consistently, game in and game out, and prove that they can run it effectively even when they play a bad team. So all in all, this season has been an amalgamation of personnel and head coach, and just in the coaches. And head coach has been a problem, especially the defense as well. One of the issues as far as being a defensive coordinator and as far as being a defensive coordinator this year, apparently, for everything that I've seen, is that they have not been able to mix and match appropriately the way that Wade Phillips potentially could. And it's frustrating because you go back to that New York Giants game as a reference. We talked about the New York Giants game. Evan Ingram was getting a lot of touches, and especially from the standpoint of Evan Ingram was, at that point in time and in that game right away, Evan Ingram was the best option and the number one target. More importantly, he was the number one target for the Denver Broncos to cover. You could have chosen to put Aqib Talib on him, Chris Harris on him, Bradley Roby potentially on Evan Ingram all game, and they chose not to do that. They chose to put Justin Simmons or Brandon Marshall necessarily on him. And Justin Simmons is a great coverage safety. He's also a good run stopper. The future is incredibly bright for the young fellow. But the fact is that Justin Simmons and Brandon Marshall can only do so much, especially Brandon Marshall. Brandon Marshall has really faltered of late. But the fact of the matter is that this defense has now shown some weaknesses in that middle linebacker spot and somewhat of that defensive line. The lack of depth on the defensive line is very disturbing, and now you're starting to see why the loss of Jared Crick was a significant loss, potentially, and why guys like Zach Kerr have stepped up a little bit necessarily. So the run defense is getting better, but the lack of depth and the lack of run stuffers is a huge loss, and this is why you have to start seeing what potential young guys you have as far as run stuffers is concerned, and that's why promoting Tyreek Jarrett is an option. A guy that is, to many eyes, as far as some of the players that have coined the term pot roast junior. It's a scenario where you have to see what you have in pot roast junior. And, Brandon Marshall, Todd Davis potentially have coined the term pot roast junior for Tyreek Jarrett. You have to see what you have, you have to see what you have in Tyreek Jarrett. I'm going to transition into now the John Elway talk. And thank you guys all for listening to the Kenneth Parker Show. This is the Kenneth Parker Show. You guys can tune in, listen every Tuesday and Friday, but this is a special edition podcast, tuning in on a Thursday. because of a work requirement that it will be happening on Fridays. But thank you guys very much for tuning in. I want to talk to you guys about this John Elway discussion. And that John Elway discussion leads you to his inability to draft offensive talent. Look, it's a hard topic. It really is, because if you say that he's bad offensively, well, then there will be people that say that because he's bad offensively, he's a horrendous draft expert, and that might be true. That does carry a lot of merit. And Sayer talked a little bit about it. Nick talked a little bit about it that I've had on past shows. Fact of the matter is that John Elway has shown the propensity to be a pretty good defensive evaluator. You see Adam Gotsis start to turn into be quite the NFL player, and that actually attributes to listening to your coaches. You know, Bill Kohler was one of the big polls as far as to try and draft Adam Gotsis, and right now Adam Gotsis is reaping the benefit of being a pretty good football player, and as I like to call, a mini Derek Wolfe. He's a high motor guy. He's strong. He has really good leverage for a guy that is as thick as he is. He's starting to create a different array of pass rush moves to get in the backfield and rush the passer and get a little bit better in run defense as well. So I do think that as far as Adam Gotsis is concerned, he understands where he fits now, and he's healthy. That's the most important factor with Adam Gotsis right now, is that he is healthy. He doesn't have that leg problem that was bugging him in the offseason last year. So he doesn't have that brace weighing over him in the regular season. Another point is Bradley Roby. John Elway went out and he drafted the future cornerback of the Denver Broncos in Bradley Roby. And right now, based on all the moves and because of the struggling season and the potential to want to up the payroll and salary cap to want to go and make a lot of moves in the offseason, it could potentially force the hand of wanting to release Aqib Talib. Now, while I'm against it from the standpoint that it's going to lit a fire through everybody in that locker room, you have to consider all the alternatives, and you have to look to the future, because trying to lock up everybody on that defensive side of the ball is incredibly hard to do, and especially when you drafted a guy in the first round and he's your third corner. Obviously, you want the amount of depth as you can possibly have at quarterback, And I think that for John Elway, he deserves a lot of credit for going out and evaluating defensive talent. Brendan Langley had a bad game against the Oakland Raiders. Okay? He had a bad game. But to say that we need to go out and release Brandon Langley is absurd. You have no football IQ and no football acumen if you want to go out and say that releasing Brendan Langley is the best alternative for this football team. He played one game, and the players that he was going up against, he was basically thrown in the wolves and asked to cover Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is one of the best route runners of any wide receiver in the National Football League. And he's been asked, because of the fact that there were some cornerbacks down, and because of the fact that Aqib Talib ended up being ejected early on in that game, he ended up being thrown into the wolves and being asked to cover Amari Cooper. It's a tall task. And he got beat a lot of times. Brendan Langley was a third-round draft pick. Some thought he was a fifth-round draft pick. But the fact is, John Elway has shown a lot of history to reach on a lot of guys. And at that point, it's been those reaches that have turned out exceptionally well. Derek Wolfe, for example, a defensive line prospect. Not a lot of people had a grade on him. Didn't really have a second-round grade on him. And the Broncos drafted him in the second round. Adam Gotsis, for that matter, was the same guy. They drafted him in the second round. Sylvester Williams. Not a lot of people had him as a first-round talent. He potentially may have not have been a first-round talent, but the fact is that he drafted Sylvester Williams, and then once Terrence Knighton left, Sylvester Williams kind of honed down that defensive line spot to the point where there were conversations as far as should the Denver Broncos re-sign Sylvester Williams. So Sylvester Williams was still an integral part of that defensive line. Then you go into the safety spot. Now you get to the point of Raheem Moore. Raheem Moore was potentially his worst draft pick. I think we all can agree with that. Raheem Moore was potentially one of the worst draft picks for John Elway. And for Raheem Moore's sake, you look at Raheem Moore, we obviously see the play that is ringing in our brains when we hear of Raheem Moore, and that's the jump and the misplay and to Jacoby Jones, and Jacoby Jones takes him for a touchdown, and well, the rest is history. The fact is, that is the type of play. It's a lot like wanting to jump a route for an interception and trying to jump the route to potentially create a spark for your defense and for your just overall your team. If you can tip away that ball, you're looking at a great scenario for your team and potentially winning that game. So while it was the right move to jump and try and bat the ball away, he misjudged his timing. He misjudged the jump because Raheem Moore misjudged the jump, and it kind of trickled down necessarily to really him and trying to change the way he played. And really, I would even go as far as to say that the play in the preseason with Raheem Moore, where he got the personal foul penalty on the sideline, I think it was against the Buffalo Bills. He had the personal foul penalty against the Buffalo Bills. It was a blow to the head. I think, and they obviously ended up calling it on Raheem Moore. If Raheem Moore was not flagged on that play, and potentially not fined, I think Raheem Moore would have been a much better football player. Because when you look at something as far as that preseason is concerned, you have to make a conscious decision of, do I want to change who I am as a football player, or should I stay who I was when I was drafted and who the Broncos thought I could be? That's ultimately where you have to look at as far as being an actual player. And I think that for John Elway's sake, Raheem Moore was a very huge disappointment. Now, so the fact of the matter is that there have been more offensive talent for the Denver Broncos that have not panned out, especially the tight ends and especially some of the offensive linemen. I think offensive line really has been his weakest draft spot. I think of all the positions that John Elway has succeeded or failed, as far as failed, the offensive line is one of the worst positions that John Elway has failed at. You look at the draft picks of Philip Blake and, who was that other guy that they drafted? I can't think of the guy's name. But their lone successful offensive lineman, at least in the last handful of years, was Matt Paradis, but that was a undrafted free agent. That kind of covers up, and that's the point that people need to make. This is the point that people really need to make when it comes to John Elway's brilliance. For as much of maybe the lack of homework that he does on the offensive side of the ball pre-draft, he does a whole heck of a lot of homework on the undrafted free agents. And I think that, if you look at it from the standpoint of who Elway was able to find as a as a undrafted free agent. You look at C.J. Anderson. You look at Matt Paradis. You look at potentially Brandon Marshall, stealing him off of the Jacksonville Jaguars practice squad. You look, you fast forward and you look at potentially Zaire Anderson as another guy. Juwan Thompson had a little bit of an impact with the Denver Broncos roster. He finds these gems, and Austin Traylor now is starting to get some production in the last 2 games. There's the option potentially for all the Elway hatred that could potentially be out there, and for all that's there, and he deserves a lot of criticism, and like I've been outlining, rightfully so. The fact of the matter is that it really is the offensive side of the ball for John Elway. It is the offensive side of the ball for John Elway that needs more homework. And for a guy, and maybe this is to a point more disappointing from a Hall of Fame quarterback perspective. The guy, John Elway, is a Hall of Fame quarterback. He saw the game better than potentially anybody to play the position. Same with Joe Montana and Dan Marino and soon-to-be Tom Brady and Roger Staubach, and just the list goes on of all the great quarterbacks. But John Elway and a bunch of those guys saw the field differently than a bunch of other guys. So why can't he, for some reason, find the right offensive talent? And more in particular, why can't he also find the right offensive line? And why can't he pick the right quarterbacks? Well, first off, as far as the quarterback is concerned, I want to make it inescapably clear. Paxton Lynch was potentially John Elway's draft pick. We all can agree there. Brock Osweiler was John Elway's draft pick. That goes back to the days with his roommate. Brock Osweiler was roommates with Jack Elway, the son of John Elway. Paxton Lynch, scouts were potentially flying to his pro day. There were Broncos scouts, and obviously the Broncos jumped ahead of the Dallas Cowboys to get Dak Prescott, and obviously Dak Prescott has come down to earth. He exited out of the game here tonight, actually. Dak Prescott exited out of this Thursday night game. And Dak Prescott is obviously played much better than Paxton Lynch. There's no denying that. He has a much better offensive line in front of him. But John Elway really wanted Paxton Lynch. He really wanted Paxton Lynch. And ultimately, when you look at the scenario, the only guy that he really, and I need to make it 100% clear, while obviously 2 of the 3 quarterbacks are all on him, it's still not a good look. It's 100% not a good look. However, there's one quarterback that he did not have a say on. He obviously had a say as far as maybe the final say as far as, okay, let's go ahead and draft that guy. The fact of the matter is you have to determine where he was drafted, and you have to determine who actually did draft him. He obviously had the final say as the 7th round draft pick of Trevor Siemian to be drafted. But the 2 guys that overall drafted Trevor Siemian was Gary Kubiak and Greg Knapp. Greg Knapp and Gary Kubiak were both responsible for wanting Trevor Siemian on this football team. That 7th round draft pick also beat your 1st round pick. That tells you a lot as far as the evaluation process potentially of you as a quarterback slash GM. So the offensive line, quarterback position has not been John Elway's strong suit. Running back actually has been okay. It's getting better. I think that Devontae Booker, for all the knock necessarily on him, I think that he needs to be a little bit more elusive. He needs to have a little bit better vision. But boy, I will tell you, once he has a full head of steam and he wants to absorb contact, he is a very powerful human being. And if he can just show a little bit more elusiveness as far as some of the runs that he decides to make and some of the the decisive cuts that he wants to make, he will be a very good running back. A lot of people compared him to Arian Foster. And, Arian Foster, bless his soul, had a very short career. A very abrupt, I will say, end to his NFL career. I think he played in the NFL for maybe 8-9 years, if I'm not mistaken, but had numerous ACL injuries to end his football career. You don't want to see that. But he was elusive. He was a catcher out of the backfield. That's another reason why I think Devontae Booker's skill set is so valuable, is because he is a great receiving back out of the backfield. He's a north-south runner, but his inability to be elusive and get to the next level, it does haunt him. It does. So he's got to be much better. He's got to be much better in that area. However, again, the promise is there, and clearly Devontae Booker is their future running back. That all said, there is a running back that was showing a lot of promise in the preseason. D'Angelo Henderson was one of them. Ultimately, he showed enough signs to be on the 53-man roster. They thought highly of him to be on the 53-man roster. But apparently they don't think highly of him enough to activate him at this point in the season, which doesn't make a lick of sense. Jamal Charles was signed on the Denver Broncos to make a significant impact on this football team. One, he is not, and two, the coaches feel like they still have training wheels for the guy and do not want to unload or unleash the future Hall of Famer in their backfield. It's like they're scared. And that actually goes to the coaching staff. So ultimately, John Elway has to do a much better job as far as trying to find the offensive talent. But to label a guy as far as trying to call for his head and call for an opportunity that John Elway must step down is 100% absurd. The alternative to this is that maybe they do need to consider bringing in another draft expert that could potentially feed ideas to John Elway and maybe convince him that this player is better than this player, maybe lessening the roles of the draft and draft scouting potentially for John Elway, so that he doesn't have to worry about that, and that he can just worry about the potential free agent scenario, the free agent scenarios, because that's one area of all the areas potentially for John Elway. Of all the areas for John Elway, that is the one potential area where he excels greatly at. He is superb when it comes to free agent homework. And however, the point, and this is maybe why the offensive grades necessarily for John Elway needs to be taken into account. Obviously, as I've been outlining before in just this show right now, is that offense has been the weakest draft analysis by John Elway. We've already been through that. However, there is one that maybe says, well, maybe he isn't as bad as we thought. Here's the point, and it takes you back to the 2012 NFL draft. They drafted Brock Osweiler. Yes, Brock Osweiler. It was his pick. However, it was his pick. But he was 5-2 in that 2015 season. Now, we can say that it was the defense and that they played exceptionally well. But the point that I've been making all along to people, as far as that is concerned, I don't care if you are 5-2. The fact of the matter is that 5-2 record is still attached to your resume, and that is attached to your resume as far as the fact that he was a 5-2 winning quarterback in that 2015 season and played decently against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New England Patriots, and maybe here and there against the Cincinnati Bengals. if he doesn't make that audible, and people say it's one play, well, I'm telling you guys, that one play won the Denver Broncos home field advantage, as well as the fumble, the bad snap in overtime of A.J. McCarron that DeMarcus Ware recovered. That bad snap earned you the home field advantage. Brock Osweiler was a very integral part of that Super Bowl run in 2015. For those that deny that, don't understand the amount of impact that he made. He was 5-2. He played exceptional football. Excuse me. He played exceptional football. And he played so well, there were a lot of thoughts in a lot of people's mind that, okay, should we maybe think a little bit as far as, well, should the Denver Broncos consider signing Brock Osweiler to a massive contract, or should they consider signing Von Miller to a massive contract? That thought was absolutely creeping in. Now you go to the other offensive weapon, per se, and it's one of, obviously, a draft pick that didn't really pan out. However, in the 2015 season, he was, if I'm not mistaken, the leading running back, leading rusher, and that was Ronnie Hillman. Ronnie Hillman provided enough change of pace in that season, while the postseason was not pretty for Ronnie Hillman. He was a very integral part, running the offense and hitting holes every now and then. You know, you come back and you look at the run that he had against the Minnesota Vikings. It was the best run of the Ronnie Hillman career. I think it was a 70, 80-yard run by Ronnie Hillman, and he took it to the house for a running touchdown. That is the type of play that the team necessarily saw in him out of San Diego State. An explosive home run hitting threat, but he never panned out over that course of period of time. However, in 2015, he was the leading scorer. He was the leading rusher for the Denver Broncos in 2015. It's important to understand is that while over the course of the time with the Denver Broncos, Brock Osweiler and Ronnie Hillman especially, never panned out. However, to throw away the fact that those guys had such a bad experience with the Denver Broncos, you're going to throw away the fact that they were instrumental to winning the most important thing on your finger, and that's a ring. I feel like that's blind analysis. That's what I like to call. That's blind analysis. So ultimately, when we come back to it, he has had a lot of inability to find the right offensive talent to fit a system. You come back to it. There's another guy in here, Cody Latimer. Cody Latimer was tabbed as a project as a wide receiver coming out of Indiana. However, he was drafted to potentially be the heir of a number 1, number 2 receiver. And while he's had his fair share of ups and downs, he's proved himself incredibly worthy as a special teams ace at this point in the season right now. He's proving himself worthy to be strongly considered, not just for more playing time. He's being strongly considered right now to the point of maybe I should be earning a second contract with the Denver Broncos. He is playing so well that he's starting to garner more targets, more throws his way, and even garnering touchdowns. Cody Latimer is playing very good football since week 8. He hasn't been racking up a lot of yardage, but if you guys have been looking up and you guys have been looking down the entire time when you guys have been wanting to watch the Denver Broncos, The fact of the matter is that Cody Latimer is still putting up decent numbers for an offense that is, well, horrible. But the 4 catches, the 48 yards, the touchdown that he had, it was a beautiful touchdown. Same with Benny Fowler. Ever since Trevor Siemian was named starter, you see guys that are players that are like a Benny Fowler or Cody Latimer that rise to the occasion and want to play for the guy next to them. And I'm not saying that Trevor Siemian can do that every now and then, but the fact of the matter is that Cody Latimer and Benny Fowler, Cody Latimer especially right now, is playing as good of a football stretch as he's ever had in his life. He's inching closer to being a complete player. And the key word there is inching. Okay? Inching means by every okay, we're not taking like one step, huge step, and so we're not going by huge step to huge step to huge step. We're talking about going literally a step to another step to another step. We're not talking big steps, okay? The fact is that Cody Latimer still has a ways to go. But he's doing a very good job of becoming a clean, successful route runner. We understand how good he is as a gunner on special teams. He has earned the right to now solidify that number 3 wide receiver. And I ask all the Broncos country to open up their eyes, open up the aperture a little bit, and understand that Cody Latimer is potentially playing himself for a second contract. And I think it's a really good comparison. I was talking to a guy on Twitter about it today. And he put a really good comparison on it. And obviously the situation ended up putting this player in a different team in the offseason, but it's the Kayvon Webster dynamic. Kayvon Webster was entering a contract year. And Kayvon Webster played it to the point that, well, I'm going to earn that contract and you guys aren't going to pay me that starter money. Well, here's the problem. Cody Latimer hasn't exactly put forth a lot of tape offensively for him to earn starter caliber money. So ultimately, the Broncos, if they so chose to re-sign Cody Latimer, I honestly feel I would strongly consider signing Cody Latimer back. I want to get you guys' comments. Hopefully it can start flowing in. We have a text line. It is a chat line. Get your guys' take as far as some of the things that I've said. We were just talking about the Denver Broncos. We're going to take a little bit of a quick break, and we're going to put that one on the burner. But if you guys still want to talk about it, I want to get your guys' comments here on the Spreaker Studio. Get it on the text line as well as on the tweet line. You guys can tweet at me at Cameron Parker PO. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Colorado Rockies in the offseason. There are 2 names in particular that are of note, and one is a hitter that was just of recent. And if you've been following the Colorado Rockies, there was actually 3 significant names that have been mentioned as a possibility for the Colorado Rockies. We're going to talk about it next right here on the Cameron Parker Show.
Revival is coming. There's no other name, so you be the glory. Every victory you have delivered me. Don't ever stop. Come on and sing it now. Lift up a shout of praise. With all my heart, I will bless your name.
I will bless your name, give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me, sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you. With all my heart, I will bless your name, give it all to you. You're all I need. From the grip of pain, you have rescued me, sweep me off my feet. I will dance for you.
Colorado Rockies obviously have been making some noise here in the MLB offseason, in now what has been, well, a little bit of a quiet start to the MLB winter meetings. I think overall the Rockies have to understand, as far as the standpoint of what exactly are they trying to find. And I think that me and Brooks are talking, and we're talking about this guy that has been linked to the Rockies so far, and that is a guy by the name of Jay Bruce. And maybe I am looking at it all wrong, and the fact of the matter is that and I think I am looking at it wrong. You know, I said that maybe Jay Bruce might be a little bit too big to play, talking about first base. But really, Brooks, as he was talking off to the side during our break, is that if you are big enough, you can still play first base. However, I just feel, as far as the outfield and as far as being crowded, I don't understand the fit as far as Jay Bruce is concerned. But if he can play the outfield, he can play first base. So do the Rockies potentially view him as a first base alternative, moving Ian Desmond out to the outfield permanently? That's an option. But it's been an option that I think that, for the Rockies' sake, they need to consider all alternatives. And because of those all alternatives, they also must consider going after the bullpen. And after looking at that, they do need to consider all alternatives, because if you look at it, Pat Neshek is a free agent, Jake McGee is a free agent, and Greg Holland is a free agent. So ultimately, the Rockies have to look at themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, who can we upgrade them? Who can we upgrade them with, and how exactly can we upgrade them with? And I think that that's why now there's starting to be rumors thrown out that the Rockies are looking at Zach Britton and Wade Davis. And ultimately, if you want to upgrade your position and you want to upgrade the bullpen, getting guys like Wade Davis or even a Zach Britton, you have to consider it. For one, you have to consider it because of you have to consider it from the standpoint that, one, if the Los Angeles Dodgers get Giancarlo Stanton, you have to acquire the amount of pitching so that you can stop Giancarlo Stanton. And the best way you can do that is by acquiring a back end of the bullpen. And if you can get a Zach Britton, if you can get a guy like a Wade Davis, and then if you can try and solidify a Wade Davis, that solidifies a bullpen, and potentially a much better bullpen. I think that just solidifies it even more for a bullpen if you can knock down a Wade Davis or a Zach Britton. Zach Britton I would rather prefer because he's a one-pitcher. He's just a one-pitch thrower. And he's a high-country heat thrower. He can throw heat. He has a slider, I think, too, with it. But, however, he is a one-pitch pitcher. He's a dominant pitcher. You know, he, in essence, was, at one point in time, he was the left-handed version of Craig Kimbrell. The Rockies have to consider all alternatives for that bullpen because despite how good at times it was, the Rockies have to upgrade the bullpen if for the fact that Greg Holland does not come back. Because I think that the alternative for the Rockies is that if, and maybe this thought is crossing their mind, if the Colorado Rockies cannot get Greg Holland to come back, they have to solidify the back end of that rotation, back end of that bullpen, with something as good, if not better. And that as good, if not better, was Wade Davis or Zach Britton, or Zach Britton. So the Rockies, and it's interesting because, and I put it out on Twitter, you guys can go back and check it out, at Cameron Parker PO. The point is that the Colorado Rockies, they have to find out exactly the type of team that they want to compete with, and they have to find the opportunity to gel. And maybe if they can have the opportunity to sign Greg Holland back, and then you get a guy like a Wade Davis or a Zach Britton via trade, that opens up so much of a bullpen that was way less of what it was a year ago. You even have to consider if they should sign Jonathan Lucroy. We've outlined a lot of reasons why they need to sign Jonathan Lucroy above all others. At times, while the loss of Jonathan Lucroy is a huge deal, not just for him as a hitter, but it's the standpoint for the Rockies that, and this really isn't the fact that if, and maybe going off of the fact, it isn't just the fact that if the Dodgers get Giancarlo Stanton, it's also the Giants get Giancarlo Stanton. They are both in the National League West, so you have to do everything that you can to shut that guy down. Now, as far as Jonathan Lucroy is concerned, he obviously was a tremendous player for you. He covered up the pitching staff well. He handled that young pitching staff. John Gray felt very comfortable pitching with him. So the Rockies have to consider every alternative, and I think that the Bud Black dynamic also could weigh into the fact that they are going so hard potentially after Wade Davis and Zach Britton. We'll see if anything else materializes as far as that. But I do believe that the Rockies, as far as Zach Britton is concerned, there is a lot of I think there's a lot of factors that play into it. For starters, you know, the Rockies, as I've outlined a couple minutes ago, the Rockies need bullpen help. They need a lot of bullpen depth. And not only that, but the Colorado Rockies have proven that they absolutely need to make sure that the package that they potentially had offered, and I don't know what that package was, or at least asked the Baltimore Orioles about during the Major League Baseball trade deadline last year in July. If that just was the package that was asked, then they have the opportunity to bring back that framework of the deal, rework some of the logistics, and they might potentially have a deal. See, that's the point, is that the Rockies were interested in Zach Britton at the Major League Baseball trade deadline in July before they acquired Neshek and Britton. So maybe that tells me is that if they didn't acquire Zach Britton, they felt like they would acquire a Pat Neshek. And maybe this year they feel with the amount of pieces and with a long framework of a time period, they feel they can have the time to start to acquire a Zach Britton. If that happens, that puts the Rockies in a position that, well, the Los Angeles Dodgers didn't acquire Zach Britton, the San Francisco Giants didn't acquire Zach Britton, the Arizona Diamondbacks didn't acquire Zach Britton. It was the Colorado Rockies that acquired Zach Britton, one of the best closers in the game. So that should tell you, and I think it should tell us in and of itself, that the Colorado Rockies and the fact that they made the postseason, they want to taste it again. And if they can taste it again, or they want to taste it again, this is why you have to open up all avenues and consider everything. Try and acquire Wade Davis and or Zach Britton. That's important. And it's also worth pointing out to all the people out there, it wasn't just Greg Holland that pitched with Steve Foster. Wade Davis pitched with Steve Foster. And Wade Davis was phenomenal with the Kansas City Chiefs. He took over the closer's role when Greg Holland went down. Okay? Wade Davis took over Greg Holland's closer spot when they went to the World Series. And who, by the way, was in that staff when they went to the World Series? You guys can look it up. It was Steve Foster. Steve Foster is an integral part of this team, which is why I still believe that Greg Holland is still very much in play to come back to Colorado because of that dynamic. Doesn't mean he will, but I do believe that that is very much in the possibility. As far as the first base is concerned, I do want to touch a little bit about that first base, and I was wrong. I was 100% wrong. The fact of the matter is that if you can play first base, or if you can play the outfield, you can play anywhere. Ian Desmond was proof in the pudding with that. If you're athletic enough and you can play first base, you can play first base. Jay Bruce had shown the capability at times when he was with the New York Mets that he could play first base, and we all know what he can do with the stick. He was maybe one of the more clutch hitters in baseball. He was one of the more clutch hitters in baseball when he was with the Cincinnati Reds for a period. He was also a hitter's ballpark. He would go to a hitter's ballpark again in Colorado, revive his career, maybe sign him to a two-year deal. So while it's a cheaper alternative rather than wanting to get a guy like a Jose Abreu or a Eric Hosmer, Eric Hosmer just seems more and more like a likely long shot. The Jose Abreu thing, however, is very, very intriguing. Because now, let's just say that if you are, and this is why I think the Jay Bruce thing is interesting, and just wanting to go after a first base is interesting. Does that mean that the Colorado Rockies are comfortable in wanting to give up a potential player like a David Dahl or a Raimel Tapia? If that is the case, then you are not just going to warrant a package of a Jose Abreu potentially. You could warrant a package for a top of the line starter. I have a gut feeling, folks, that there will be a point in the Rockies offseason this time where they were dangling the opportunity of trying to trade for Marcus Stroman. I believe that the Rockies are going to try their darndest to make a strong play and try and acquire a starting pitcher. Every youthful rotation needs a strong veteran presence. And the best way you can do that is by trying to get the best alternative. And the best alternative out there is Jake Arrieta. And they are one of 5 teams that are in the hunt for Jake Arrieta. If Jake Arrieta is on his game, the sinker is absolutely deadly. He has a slider that can move. It's all about the arm movement and his actual strength of his arm, because it feels like it's declining. It all depends on where he is physically, because as far as a physical specimen, there might not be a more physical specimen at pitcher than Jake Arrieta. So I think it's very responsible for the Rockies to go after this with a very much of an open mind. I think if you are the Colorado Rockies, despite that 5-year, $70 million deal to Ian Desmond, whether they said that they were comfortable of making him a first baseman or not last year, which they said that they would, I really do believe that Ian Desmond is flexible enough that he could start in left field, right field, and at center field if push came to shove that you wanted a better deal. So ultimately, the Rockies have to do what's best for this team, and I do believe that the under-the-radar starting pitching is very much in play for the Colorado Rockies. Because every youthful rotation, John Gray or not, every youthful rotation needs a veteran presence. This has been the Cameron Parker Show. Hopefully, we try to see if we can get Anthony Rodriguez on. Apparently, that fell through, but we're going to try and get him on no matter what as the show progresses. This has been another edition of the Cameron Parker Show. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and go back and listen to this Cameron Parker Show episode on iHeartRadio, iTunes. And when you are on iTunes, please subscribe to the Cameron Parker Show podcast, write a review, tell how great this podcast was, or if you feel like putting a damper on this Cameron Parker Show, write how bad it was. That's entirely your call. Please subscribe to the Cameron Parker Show podcast on iTunes, and also follow the show. Oh, looks like we got a message over from Anthony. We'll see if I can get him on here a little bit. He looks like he just caught an opening. We'll see if we can get him on. So right as soon as I was just getting ready to finish, he was just getting ready to jump on. So we talked a little bit about the Denver Broncos. We talked a little bit. We finished a little bit with the Colorado Rockies. But I want to see if when Anthony jumps on, if we can maybe get his perspective necessarily on the matter and talk a little bit about his current state of the Denver Broncos and potentially where they fit in his eyes and what he's seen. Because again, the Denver Broncos, they have been struggling, and we could potentially get his state and feeling necessarily for John Elway. So there's a lot of discussions for certainly to talk about with Anthony, and we'll see if we can get him on here as soon as possible. He had just messaged in, and so we'll see if we can get him on. He's looks like he's getting ready to. All right, so we're gonna talk about it, and when we're gonna take another quick break, and hopefully by that time, we will have Anthony Rodriguez on, and when we do, we will get the full scope of where he feels that the Denver Broncos are, and we'll go from there. All right, so I will go see if I can put him on here. All right, sorry for the delay. We will be... All right, we are getting ready to phone Anthony, and we'll see if we can jump on. Obviously, we've been talking about the Denver Broncos. We've been talking about the Colorado Rockies. As I said, we're going to get his state on the matter, and we'll find out what he potentially feels as far as the state of the franchise for the Broncos, the Colorado Rockies, and maybe go from there. All right, so again, the Denver Broncos and the Colorado Rockies. So again, we're going to give Anthony a little bit of some time. The Colorado Rockies. We were talking about it. The first base scenario. You have to consider this alternative of a Jose Abreu, and maybe this is why we talked about it as far as the outfield. This is why there's that potential feel for me that you have to upgrade the first base no matter what. This is why the Ian Desmond thing, it provides so much flexibility. We talked a little bit about it with CJ when he was on Tuesday, that he has the ability to play in the outfield. And not only that, but he's so athletic to the point where he could play infield if called upon. He's a versatile player. He's a lot like a Ben Zobrist. He could play short. He could play second. He could play third. He could play second base for all that matter. And maybe potentially that's, and for all intents and purposes, as great as DJ LeMahieu is, maybe that's a deal that the Rockies are considering. Because again, DJ LeMahieu is a second baseman. Ian Desmond can be plugged and played in that second baseman spot. Are they considering trading DJ LeMahieu to the Baltimore Orioles in a package for Zach Britton? If that is the case, that is an interesting deal for the Colorado Rockies. Because you're trading a starting caliber second baseman to the Baltimore Orioles, to a team that, is comfortable with, at least somewhat comfortable with Jonathan Scope at second base / short, and Manny Machado being flexible enough to go from third base to shortstop. So it's going to afford the Rockies at least some flexibility, and this is why the Rockies, as far as where they want to target, this is why the Rockies in and of itself have been going at it probably better than they have in a while. They've said overall that they wanted to go after athletes. They've said that they want to sign athletic players and players that will play multiple positions. Certainly multiple positions in the outfield, and Ian Desmond covers it. So if just by sure happenstance, if it just happens by sure happenstance that the Rockies are, for that matter, considering a DJ LeMahieu to Zach Britton contract, for one, DJ LeMahieu is cheap. So we will potentially see. We're going to potentially see what Anthony Rodriguez feels about it. Anthony joins the broadcast. He was, as I outlined earlier, he was actually the creator of the Cameron Parker Show. Am I right?
What's going on, man? How are you?
Good. How is it over on the East Coast?
Oh, it's nice and going out of work right now. It's nice. It's not too bad though. It's a little bit gloomy. The weather in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, I hear you there. That's the one part about Colorado that does stink, though. It can be pretty unpredictable. Then you got the East Coast with all that humidity.
You know what? I used to actually hate the humidity, and I've actually come to love the humidity. I actually don't like the dryness anymore.
You know, it's so funny because I was the same way, and it was kind of the way when I was living in Virginia for a long period of time. I think it was like 7 to 9 years is when I was living down there. But the first like few months when you're there, it feels like a drag, and you're not really all that used to it. And then all of a sudden, after all those like months go by, you just start kind of getting used to it.
Absolutely.
Well, we're talking about the Denver Broncos, and we're talking about the Colorado Rockies, and we threw in obviously the John Elway discussion, which opens up a lot of doors. What, in your mind, is the current state of the Denver Broncos?
Oh boy, where do we start? You know, it's an odd time right now to kind of follow what kind of Broncos are up to right now. I'd say, you know, definitely coming off of a high of, you know, that 4 to 5 year period where we're always kind of looking for that Super Bowl victory and always looking to kind of compete. You know, we obviously had a phenomenal defense even before Peyton Manning. You know, the Tim Tebow year where he was, you know, absolutely crazy, and Prater had a great year, and the defense was amazing, and then we transitioned into Peyton Manning. It didn't go well in that year with facing off when we lost in the division round against the Ravens, and then obviously went on the Super Bowl blowout, 48-3, and then we went on to win the Super Bowl. But now it's just those expectations. It's odd to not have them for this year and this past year, where you know we transitioned away from Peyton Manning. We looked to turn the keys over to you know a couple different quarterbacks who were going to compete, and the defense has still been pretty good. But right now it's a tough time because what was the last time outside the last year, you know, that we can remember where the Broncos just aren't a team that is competing for anything that's kind of worth competing for. Right now we're competing for draft position. So it's definitely strange, but at the same time, it really has only been last year and this year, you know, where we have been in this quote-unquote transition period where it's definitely uncomfortable. I know John Elway and, you know, even Vance Joseph coming in knowing that the environment he was coming into was a winning culture, a winning environment in the last, you know, 4 to 5 years. And now it's the time of transition, and it's kind of hard for Broncos fans to admit. It's the truth, and now we kind of have to accept it and kind of take that next step forward and know that it's not only the quarterback position where there's struggles. There's struggles on the offensive line. There's struggles in the running game. Heck, the defense is actually pretty good statistically everywhere, but at the same time, they've also had their struggles. I know a lot of it has to factor in with having to deal with short field, but there's a lot of struggles all over the place from the top to plays drafting over the last, you know, 5-6 years to having all these issues now that are more glaring because we don't have a solid option, you know, at quarterback. So it's an odd time for sure, but you got to say that I think this time it's going to be a lot more short-lived than a lot of other teams in the NFL have to deal with because we got a guy at the top who knows and has been capable and been proven capable of putting a winning franchise together through the draft, through free agency, through the coaching staff he assembles in John Elway, and hopefully this period doesn't last too long, but, you know, it's a good thing that it's an uncomfortable feeling to be in because that means it's hopefully not going to last too long, judging by the personnel that are, you know, at the top right now dealing with this team. So it's an odd time for sure, but we'll see what kind of progresses throughout the rest of the season and then going into the offseason.
Well, we know that for a fact that as far as being embarrassed, well, last time the Denver Broncos were embarrassed overall was that 43-8 loss in the Super Bowl, and we know exactly what happened that next offseason. We upgraded the defensive line, or we upgraded the defense, I should say, with T.J. Ward, DeMarcus Ware, Aqib Talib. 3 huge pieces of what it is today, or what 2 are gone now, but just as far as the whole landscape of what that defense is today. And so, as far as John Elway is concerned, I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of went back to his roots. And while the offensive side of the ball, as far as his draft is concerned, has obviously taken a significant hit, and rightfully so, because of how he's kind of failed in those areas. However, there's still, and I'm sure you've been seeing kind of on Twitter when I've been making that point, is that through all of the point that he may have been failing as far as trying to draft offensive talent, that 2012 NFL draft was still capable and was instrumental enough to win that 2015 Super Bowl, talking about Brock Osweiler and Ronnie Hillman especially. So I think for John Elway, it's important for him to go back to his roots and maybe go to the free agency. But the problem there's really only one quarterback potentially that is legitimately on the free agent market. The other two, Drew Brees and Eli Manning, could potentially retire.
Well, there's a lot of options. This is, if there's any year, and I know this is, that you can't say this very often. If there's any year that you want to, any offseason where you want to need a quarterback, as silly as that sounds, because you never want to need a quarterback because you would like to have stability at the position. But man, I tell you what, this is the offseason where you want to you want that need to be this offseason because you got a lot of guys. You mentioned a couple, Kirk Cousins, Tyrod Taylor. I think it's out of the realm of possibility for Drew Brees because I think he's going to stay in New Orleans the rest of his career. But even he is an option. Eli Manning, how you mentioned, those are just some of the names out there. There's a lot of Case Keenum's another name out there. There's a lot of guys there, and then as we've all talked about the draft, this is a class that, while it's not as good as it was supposed to be, highly touted. Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, Darnold. Actually, he's probably going to go back to USC. I think he should. And then obviously the guys who maybe get in that lower tier. Well, even though I think they'll be in the higher tier when it comes down to what their career is going to turn into. But Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson. There's a lot of options out there for quarterback. And while the Broncos, as I said previously, have a lot more glaring needs, just like they do need a quarterback, they need to upgrade the offensive line. They need to figure out what they're going to do with C.J. Anderson and Jamal Charles. If they're going to want to stick with the Devontae Booker, what they're going to do, defensively, you got to see if they're going to move on from guys like Darian Stewart, if they're going to trade Aqib Talib. There's a lot of question marks going the offseason, but as I previously stated, most importantly, being that John Elway, obviously the former legendary Hall of Fame quarterback, there's a lot of options out there that the Broncos have to choose from for quarterback. And you usually can't say that pretty often. Maybe there's one or two good upgrades, but there's a lot of franchise potential quarterbacks on this offseason coming up. So we'll kind of see what Elway can do. But Elway, I think the key for him is, I think, as crazy as it is to say, because it's the success he's had as the top executive, maybe he should consider bringing in some other football minds to kind of help with the rest of the decision making. When it comes to putting a team together, because you mentioned a couple solid draft picks, but if you go all the way back to his first time when he was really in the scheme of decision making, when it comes to drafting, having a say in the Von Miller selection in 2011. There's a couple good selections there. You mentioned Brock Osweiler. I wouldn't still count it as a failure. I know obviously he's had his ups and downs. He left to Houston. Now he's back, and now he's back on the bench. Didn't even dress last week. But there's a lot of guys where they are not on the team anymore. They are not on the league. I know that goes for a lot of teams in the NFL. But there's been a lot of failed draft picks, a lot of misjudgment based on player potential. I know that's not only Elway. I know that falls on all the way down to the area, the regional scouts who are searching and then looking through, not just through the top schools in FBS, but all the way through. There's a lot of guys who have been failure draft picks, and I think maybe Elway can bring in some other guys who can help more selection because Elway, as great as he is and as smart as he is, and now bring the teams put together, and as blasphemous as it may sound, there's been a lot of bad draft picks. And so if you want to start this team into a successful rebuild, which you'd be foolish to not call it that, it is what it is. It is a rebuild. It's not a complete restart, but it is a rebuild, a retooling. And I think Elway has to recognize that and understand that, yes, you could bring in a quarterback to compete next year and go 9-7, 10-6, and try to compete. But there's a lot of question marks on this team. Most of them on the offense, and a lot of them need to be solved, over time, not just in this offseason at quarterback.
You mentioned about some of the quarterback options. I personally feel that they kind of go by tiers as far as where they go first, and if they don't get the guy that they necessarily want in free agency, then I think that they will go to the draft, because everything that I've heard, and I was talking to you about, is that everything that I've heard is that they've done a lot of homework as far as the NFL draft is concerned. And well, when you start losing a lot of games and when you start potentially warranting a top 5 pick, you're going to start reaping the rewards potentially of maybe having the opportunity to draft a guy like a Josh Rosen. But, and for if it just ends up being so lucky, if Sam Darnold ends up coming out, that could potentially change not just the landscape of you going after a quarterback in free agency, but it changes the landscape of you in the top 5. So for you, whether the Broncos have a top 5 or a let's just say top 7 pick for right now, where in your mind do you think they should go? Because for me, the two quarterbacks that I'm kind of biased to right now, if I can use that term, is Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson.
For me, if they were to finish in that top 5, even top 10, honestly, I think they need to go offensive line. They need to go offensive tackle. The names I've been seeing out there are guys who are those stud offensive linemen, because we know that in today's NFL, the best quarterbacks have really good offensive lines, and that's what makes them even more successful. So I think you got to go offensive line in that first round, and then I think you can kind of decide maybe in that second round, you maybe go for a guy like Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, guys like that.
Well, and I think that too, even getting an offensive line, and that's not a bad alternative. It's really not a bad alternative because of the fact that, one, maybe even start considering moving Garrett Bowles to right tackle and then drafting your left tackle again. But I think that as far as an alternative, even if, and John Elway's shown the propensity of doing it, and that is making sure that all of your needs are met in free agency so that you can draft BPA, best player available, no matter what draft position you're in. So I think that, let's just say they get a guy like Kirk Cousins, and in order to do that, you'd have to cut ties with maybe an Aqib Talib or a Brandon Marshall, or Brandon Marshall, in order to get a guy like a Kirk Cousins. So obviously that is the big fish, and that big fish, from everything that I've heard, has been attached to Denver really since, week 8, it seems. I'm talking about the Denver Broncos, but it's a very interesting scenario for the Denver Broncos, and there's really no, at this point with the Denver Broncos, there's really no right or wrong anymore with the team. There's probably more right in a lot of different scenarios than there is wrong because of how bad they are.
Yeah, and going offensive line in the first round isn't a sexy pick. It's going to make a lot of Broncos fans, irritated. Our good friend, our former co-host, Stephen Priest, tweeted the other day. He's like, it's kind of like flavor of the month with the Broncos, where they're, always kind of the sexy pick at quarterback. Whoever's the next name out there is a guy that, the Broncos should go after. And, you and myself are kind of including that in where we, if there's another name out there we kind of look at and we say, okay, that could be an option at quarterback. It's not necessarily that, we're going to say, oh, yeah, Case Keenum should be the quarterback, or, oh, Kirk Cousins should be the quarterback, or, oh, Tyrod Taylor should be the quarterback. It's more like I'm kind of evaluating every guy that is a possibility.
Right.
Really what they all are. Every single quarterback out there that is available, whether they be the top guys like Kirk Cousins, Drew Brees, Tyrod Taylor, or guys through the draft like Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson we've been talking about, every single one of them is a possibility. When the Broncos need a quarterback, you have to look at all the possibilities.
Right.
Right now the Broncos don't have that guy, and they have to find out what should be and who should be the guy who's going to lead this franchise going forward under quarterback, because it's not on the roster right now. Paxton Lynch has looked terrible. Trevor Siemian's been too inconsistent. Now he turns the ball over a lot. And Brock Osweiler, it just isn't the guy, because he can't throw it more than 10 yards downfield with confidence. He has issues running around the pocket. Even as tall as he stands, he still has issues seeing downfield, and I think he now maybe has enough game tape where we can say he's not the option. So,
not to even mention his delivery.
May all be. Sure, go ahead.
I said not even to mention his delivery too. Brock's delivery.
And his delivery as well. There's a lot of holes with all three guys, and it sucks to say because Paxton Lynch was so highly touted, and I know the Broncos. Obviously, always people fans like to say how they had a chance. Oh, like Dak Prescott. Well, hindsight's 2020.
Right.
That's with a lot of different players and a lot of different sports and a lot of different drafts and a lot of different free agencies. You never know what's going to turn out, but Paxton Lynch doesn't seem like he has it, and Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler have had their chances as well. And honestly, I don't think John Elway is going to do what I can almost guarantee is that going into this upcoming offseason, there's no way John Elway is going to have one of these three quarterbacks go into next season being the starting quarterback because John Elway doesn't want to settle. John Elway, and I hate this. I want to take a second to go on a tangent real quick because I really hope we're not going to be talking about John Elway like we are Jerry Jones in the next 20 years. because honestly, when you're talking about a guy that has that much decision making and when you hire a guy like Vance Joseph, where he's a great head coach, but obviously it's his first time at NFL head coach, and you would think he's going to always kind of turn to Elway's knowledge. I'm not calling Vance Joseph a yes man, but Vance Joseph's definitely going to kind of follow in the direction of John Elway because Elway's, he's put a championship team together. But I don't want Vance Joseph or whoever's going to be the Broncos head coach to be a Jason Garrett where it's follow the leader of, John Elway or, as I compare it to Jerry Jones, because eventually John Elway's going to have to continue to get some help from other guys. More knowledge. It's not, you can't have tunnel vision when it comes to evaluating talent, even as great as John Elway is at being a top guy, top executive. You have to kind of get some help from other guys. But anyway, John Elway is not going to go into next season with a quarterback on this roster as a starting quarterback because there has not been enough to show that if John Elway does think this team is Super Bowl contender with a quarterback, which they were when they then got Peyton Manning, he needs to find a guy who can maybe bring that team to the level he thinks the rest of his roster is at. And John Elway isn't a guy who's going to settle, and I don't think John Elway is a guy that's going to be content with going 8-8 or going this season probably 7-9 or 5-11 or whatever have you. So it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to coin that term blind analysis when it comes to, and for that sake, I absolutely agree with you. For people that think that they have their future starter in one of these three quarterbacks, and whether Paxton Lynch can end up being that guy, who knows, because of the fact that his evaluation, you could say, has been pushed to next year again. I mean, that at least has been out there, and so that's why I think that as far as if there is one quarterback of all the three that could potentially be on this roster, it's Paxton Lynch. But as far as the other two, I don't foresee the other two being in here. And as far as being a starter, it's blind analysis to think that at least one of the three quarterbacks will start next year. And that's why I completely agree with you. And we might disagree potentially on who the starter might be, but that's not the point. The point is that the Denver Broncos starter in 2018 is not on this roster right now. And
the only reason that I will agree with you about Paxton being on this roster right now is do you think Elway's only going to let 2 years go by for a first-round pick to be considered a bust of his? Because I don't think so.
Well, but
he's not going to let Paxton Lynch turn to a bust that quickly. I think Paxton Lynch has. If we were to bet on which of the three has the best chance to be on this roster next year, I guarantee I would absolutely put my money on Paxton Lynch because he's a first-round talent.
Yeah.
Or graded as such previously, actually he was graded as a second, third-round talent, but taken as a first-round talent by John Elway, who there's a lot of good things you can say about Elway. One of the good things can also be considered a bad thing, and that is his ego. And I think when you're talking about a guy who just drafted Paxton Lynch and he didn't have big chance to start last year, started a couple games, had some injury issues this year, got beat up by Trevor Siemian, started a game, got injured, and so as you mentioned previously, he hasn't had that evaluation period yet. And I don't think Elway is going to be quick to, even if he gets like a guy like Kirk Cousins or even drafts a Baker Mayfield or what have you, I do not think he's going to give up on Paxton Lynch that quickly and have a high draft pick of his, under his name. That is a John Elway draft pick.
Right.
I don't think he's going to have that pick turn into a bust without a little more analysis, a little more evaluation. So I think Osweiler probably won't be here. The only reason he may be here is because he's such a cheap option. And Trevor Siemian, I don't think will be here because they know what they have in Siemian. And Siemian can go be a solid. I think Trevor Siemian is a solid backup in this league But if Paxton Lynch is already going to be that, you don't need two backups because third stringer doesn't necessarily make a big time difference. You can have anyone be your third stringer. So it'll be interesting.
Absolutely. Let's transition a little bit to the Colorado Rockies a little bit. The Rockies actually were in the news today as far as significant news, as far as who they were interested in. And I guess I'm not all that surprised because, you know, you think of where they were this last season. They went to the postseason for the first time in 10 years. I mean, as far as significant record and the way they were playing. Obviously, last time they went to the postseason was 2009. But, I mean, as far as their play and everything, it really did resemble to the magic that they had in 2007. But they were attached to really good names as far as to upgrade that bullpen. And so I think that if you're the Rockies and you're being attached to names like Zach Britton and Wade Davis, potentially, I would, if I was the Rockies, I would consider signing both of those guys or trading for and signing both of them.
Well, you got to kind of definitely see what happens with Greg Holland. I know he's rejected the first, qualifying offer from the Rockies, and I don't know whether he's going to be a top option. But, these names that are out there, you could argue that even as dominant as Greg Holland was in the first half, I know he kind of faltered later on, and you never know. I know this is a guy that was coming off a big-time injury, and, he obviously had a great first year off that injury, but there's a lot of these options that are being named are definitely quality throwing arms. So, it could be Wade Davis or Zach Britton. I know the reason why Britton didn't get moved at the deadline last year is because the Orioles were asking way too much for him. So I don't know what it would kind of require for the Rockies to move him. I can imagine, it might include a couple top prospects, not in the realm of, say, Brendan Rodgers for sure, but, because Rodgers may eventually be up there, you might be looking at having to throw away a couple, having to trade maybe some draft picks, maybe even a DJ LeMahieu. I don't know. The Britton requests were pretty hefty, and that's why he stayed in an Oriole uniform throughout the rest of 2017. So there's a lot of options out there. Again, it's weird because a lot of moves haven't been made yet. I think everyone in this league is kind of in a holding pattern while this Giancarlo Stanton discussion continues, and it looks like he may be heading west one way or the other, whether it be from one NL West rival to another, the Giants or the Dodgers. But I think a lot of stuff is in a holding pattern right now because of how big of a contract that is.
Yeah.
And a lot of things you can't do, and you can or you cannot do because if you do or you do not get him. So I think that's the first domino that has to fall, as weird as that is, because it's a big domino.
You're right.
But I think that has to happen because a lot of these teams that may be interested, we're talking about a Giants team that may be interested in even both in that bullpen, or even a Giants team that's trying to bounce back from a really tough season. So I think a lot of things are going to have to wait, and that includes the Rockies because, as crazy it is to say, and I guarantee it's probably not happening, but man, that would be very interesting if the Rockies got in the conversation for Stanton. But that would be a lot of money. I don't know if the Rockies want to spend. So we'll have to see. But you got to upgrade the bullpen for sure. They had some issues going late. I know they may lose Holland. Some other question marks. But it's weird because we're talking about the Rockies looking to add pieces to continue to compete. Because I don't know, Cameron, if you remember, but Rockies made the playoffs last year.
They did?
I thought about it the other day. I took a moment. I stopped. I think I was walking around or doing something. I paused for a moment. I was like, wait a second. The Rockies made the playoffs last year. Took me a second because that's, as you said, 2009. It's been odd. I actually was watching the game in a Buffalo Wild Wings when they were playing the Diamondbacks, and it took me a second. It took me till like the 6th inning, actually, to sit there and go, I'm watching the Rockies playing the postseason right now. Now, granted, it was in a wild card game, and I do consider that the playoffs. I do.
Yeah.
It didn't feel completely like the playoffs, but it was a mini step in half direction. If we're talking about when people say like 1 and 1A, I'd say 1 is the full on postseason where you're getting into a 5 or 7 game series, and 1A is the wild card. It's still the postseason, so it took me a bit. But yeah, the Rockies are in off season. My point being, the Rockies are in off season where they're looking to add pieces to compete, and they have to get competing quickly because, as sad as it is to say, Nolan Arenado's coming up here pretty soon. Charlie Blackmon's coming up here pretty soon. If this winning environment in this winning clubhouse and the winning overall doesn't continue, this postseason discussion, this whole discussion about the Rockies competing, it could very well be short-lived if the Rockies don't keep it up. They are, I would say, under very much pressure to continue to be competing because guys around here, guys in that dugout have been part of this rebuild, and they do not want to go back to being a rebuild. So we'll kind of see. We'll kind of see what kind of happens.
Well, and I think that's kind of why, and Nolan Arenado, for instance, I think was someone on record as far as maybe being a driving point to trying to acquire Pat Neshek and a Jonathan Lucroy this offseason or this MLB trade deadline. But you mentioned about the MLB trade deadline and about Zach Britton. More importantly, it's worth noting that the Rockies, it may have not been touted as a very highly touted rumor necessarily as far as a strong landing spot. But if you remember, the Rockies were attached to Zach Britton during the MLB trade deadline. So it's potential that they maybe laid some framework of a deal that could potentially be laid for the offseason. And so I think that for the Rockies, it's just up to, well, maybe we should sweeten the offer a little bit. So I think that for the Rockies, maybe they should consider trading a guy like DJ LeMahieu. And I think that for the Rockies, while they may have coined Ian Desmond the potential first baseman,
Jay Bruce.
It's important to understand that he's also flexible, and he's like a Ben Zobrist, where he can play anywhere. He can play in the outfield. He can play in the infield. He can play shortstop. He can play second base. So if you decide to trade a DJ LeMahieu, and as crappy as it would be as far as his hitting production, to take him out of the lineup, you can replace hitting if you're the Rockies and replace him with another hitter. It's not that hard.
You can also replace some of that offense with an even bigger bat, as I've kind of yelled a couple times. Jay Bruce. Rumors the Rockies may be interested in Mr. Former Cincinnati Red, former Cleveland Indian, Jay Bruce. So that might be something that we could look into. I know the Rockies are looking for, different option at first base, put it that way, because, Ian Desmond's a great guy, but it didn't necessarily work out, and Mark Reynolds kind of won that spot in this season, and, Jay Bruce is a free agent out there, so that could put some pop in that infield, and even more so help out that first base option.
And for me, the guy that I would rather target maybe as a trade piece, and they've been attached to him really ever since he came into the league as a 25, 26, 27-year-old, I can't remember. But they were really close to signing Jose Abreu when he came in. And ever since then, they have been attached to Jose Abreu potentially as a trade option. And this year, it's no exception. They are still attached to Jose Abreu as a trade exception. And I think as far as their farm system, the Rockies is concerned, it's way better than it was a few years ago. And so I think as far as the Rockies is concerned, if you feel like you want to upgrade and you want to make a move potentially at first base, I think that, and while they certainly need pitching, there are those very few guys like Yoenis Cespedes that can change a framework of a lineup, like Eric Hosmer and Yoenis Cespedes. I think Jose Abreu is in that conversation as well as a potential guy that can really change that lineup.
Well, don't rule out Carlos Santana also. That's another solid option I've seen the Rockies kind of throw at. He could be another guy that they could take a look at first base.
Yeah, Carlos Santana as well. And but yeah, so it's just a very interesting time now seeing that the Rockies are being attached to different names, and you have Wade Davis, who has a lot of comfortability as well with Steve Foster, their pitching coach. So there's a lot of different factors potentially that the Rockies could go after, and we mentioned it, you mentioned it. It's just so weird now, and it's actually in a way refreshing to say that the Rockies are going after it, it feels, in the offseason and into the winter meetings, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they do. Because, well, it's well documented as far as the heated debates that we used to have at the KMET Sports Show. So, talking about the Rockies.
It's weird to talk about the Rockies as competitors, but that's exactly what they are now, and they're going to hopefully continue to build on it and not regress and prove that this wasn't just a fluke, which over 162 game season, I think baseball is one of the best sports to kind of say it's kind of hard to determine whether a season's a fluke, because we're talking about a 162 game stretch. It's not the NFL where it's 16 games. Heck, it's not NBA where it's 82 games. 162 games, the most games in any sport. So it's hard to say that that's a fluke, because 162 games, it's hard to be progressively good over that long period of time if you're not good. So Yeah, and with confidence to say, the Rockies are one of the final, 8 teams to make a playoffs now. It's there's 30 teams. I mean, there's a lot. So it's good to have the Rockies being able to say, let's take that next step. Let's not just settle. Let's not regress. Let's take that next step and add pieces to continue to be a contender. And while he didn't win the award, for where this team was. Granted, I know they were in the same cellar with the Astros, and they obviously haven't bounced back in the way that the Astros have, but they bounced back in a big way. And a lot of credit goes to Bud Black for bringing this team together. A lot of credit goes to Jeff Bridich as well, because a lot of things could have gone the opposite way, and a lot of pieces could have not worked out, and a lot of things could have gone wrong. But pretty much everything went right, and that's why the Rockies were in the position that they were, and that's why they're in the position that they are now.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Anthony, thank you very much, man, for joining joining a little bit late. But, hey, we got you on last half an hour or so of the show.
It's been too long.
Absolutely. And we'll have you on here, sometime here soon, and we'll talk, maybe have you on for a full show and everything. So it's good to talk to you again, and obviously talk some sports and Rockies, Denver Broncos, just all above, man. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you as well, man. Keep it up and keep me in mind whenever you want to have me on. I am more than happy to. So keep me in mind, man. Go Cameron Parker Show, huh?
Right. Follow Anthony at
AnthonyRod33 on Twitter.
That's right. There's no underscores. I decided to get to ditch the underscores.
Let's go! Finally.
Right.
All right, man. Take care.
Hey, you too. See ya. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Anthony Rodriguez, the somewhat creator of the Cameron Parker Show. Well, we'll take it off. This has been the Cameron Parker Show. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and we'll see what the Rockies can do as we enter now the week of the MLB winter meetings. You guys have a great night.